In this list we'll go over some of the worst cantrips in D&D, where pretty much all of them have their uses, so just because it appears on this list doesn't necessarily mean it's bad, just not as good as a lot of the more other useful cantrips. And at number 10 we have Shocking Grasp. This is a melee cantrip which requires you to perform a spell attack roll on the target in order to deal 1d8 lightning damage, and if you succeed, they can't take reactions until the start of their next turn. So the most useful application of this is if you're a spellcaster in melee and you want to run away. This ability will give you some damage and the ability to get away without provoking an attack of opportunity. So, free damage and escape all in one. That sounds really good, doesn't it? Well, here's the thing about Shocking Grasp. The damage it deals is fine. It's just if what you really want to do is get away from a dangerous enemy, you can just take the disengage action to 100% guarantee they won't hit you with an attack of opportunity. Shocking Grasp has a chance to fail. If you miss your attack, that's it. You'll still have to move out and get hit, or sit still and wait for them to beat on you in your next turn. It adds a level of risk to a situation in which you want to avoid risk by trying to get away from them. So in worst case scenario, you miss your attack and you still have to move away anyway and get hit. Best case scenario, you do a little bit of damage and then you're able to get away. Shocking Grasp doesn't have the worst damage of a cantrip. It even scales as you get to higher levels, which is good. But it's definitely not one of the harder hitting ones either. If you really want a melee ranged cantrip, there are better options than just trying to use Shocking Grasp. Generally, you want to be at range using your hard hitting range cantrips like Firebolt or Eldritch Blast. Although if you do have a high attack roll and you have the extra cantrip slots, and you're pretty confident you'll be able to land it against whatever target you're trying to run away from, I guess it's not half bad. Definitely one of the best cantrips on this list, but not really as useful as it might appear. Unless the target you use it on has really good reactions that you want to shut down, in which case you might want to run up to a target to use Shocking Grasp, like if you want to shut down a spellcaster from being able to use Counterspell, for example. And at number 9, we have Mending. This is a cantrip with a 1-minute cast time, which basically just repairs small broken pieces of equipment or items. Like if there's a break in a chain, a broken key, broken arrows, really small stuff. You can fix them with magic thanks to Mending. That's the thing about Mending though, it's only situationally useful, and its effect is so minor that it could be added to Prestidigitation and no one would notice. It's like they took one of the many magical effects of Prestidigitation and then branched it off into its own ability because the ability to fix minor breaks and scratches seemed a little bit too much to be added to a spell that already does everything. There are definitely uses for the spell though. There are even some classes which require this ability in order to heal their pets. I'm not talking about those ones though. For people who don't require this ability as part of their base class, you won't really miss out on much if you don't take Mending. Or if no one else in your party takes it. You can't really use it in combat since it has a 1-minute cast time, so it's squarely an out of combat type ability. And if you want to use it to fix big problems, you can do it with enough Mending uses. There's even an official module for D&D that has a part which requires someone to use Mending in order to fix a door, and you can't really complete the encounter without fixing this door in some way. And the module says you can use Mending on it 5 times in order to fix it. So you'd have to defend someone for 5 minutes while they cast Mending a whole bunch of times in order to fix the door. But even in the module it says if no one in your party knows Mending, there will just be a random NPC in the building who knows it and you can just go fetch them. So it just adds one more step to the encounter and that's it. So even an encounter designed for this ability, it wasn't actually needed, which I found kind of funny. It's definitely more of a flavor thing, even if it can have some situational uses. Like other situations need to fix a badly damaged door, and you have an ample amount of time in order to do it. So it's not useless, but it's not needed either. And for the most part, a lot of cantrips are pretty situationally useful anyway, so that's why it's on this list. And at number 8, we have Light. This is a cantrip which allows you to turn basically any object into a flashlight. You can cast the ability on someone's weapon so they have bright light for 20 feet. You can use it on a stone in order to throw it in a dark hallway, or use it on something in order to throw it in the air to act as an emergency flare. The light also lasts for 1 hour and doesn't require concentration, so it definitely fits into the situationally useful category. Here's the thing though. You can accomplish the same feats with a simple torch. A torch literally provides the same amount of light and only costs about 5 copper per torch. So all of the benefits of the cantrip can be accomplished by a very simple piece of adventuring gear. However, if you're in a situation in which you can't use the torch, or if you want to light up one of your weapons so that you don't have to drop a torch at the start of your combat with your free action in order to use your weapon with both hands, then light frees up the item interaction for something, I guess. There's also the thing where a lot of magic items will sometimes passively give a light effect, and a lot of races have dark vision, so they don't need torches anyway. And there's 3 other light-giving cantrips which are a tiny bit more useful. Dancing Light allows you to produce 4 balls of light that you can move around the room however you want. Control Flames allows you to double the brightness of a torch, or to control the fire in the torch into whatever shape you want, which opens up a whole bunch of different kinds of creative uses. And Produce Flame allows you to create a light for 10 minutes, which can also be used to attack something for 1d8 fire damage. Now, of all the light-giving cantrips, light does give you the brightest light without requiring a torch. Otherwise, Control Flame gives you the brightest light by doubling the torch's range. So it's not even the best at giving you the most amount of light. But even with all of this, it's still situationally useful. And it's in a situation that comes up a lot, which is why it only gets a low spot on this list of, the worst of. And at number 7, we have Poison Spray. Now, this is a damaging cantrip which has a 1d12 damage dice, which is the highest damage dice that cantrips can go up to, and even scales with your level. Although there's 2 things about this cantrip that kind of make it a trap ability for new players, because that sounds a lot better than it really is. You see, it deals poison damage, which is kind of the worst type of damage in the game because of how easy it is to gain resistances or immunity to it. It also has a 10-foot range, so it's the shortest range cantrip in the game, and is basically a melee ability with how close you have to be in order to use it. And it requires a Constitution saving throw, where most monsters in the monster manual have high Constitution scores, so that's kind of a terrible saving throw you want to force enemy monsters to use. But assuming you're getting in range to do everything anyway, you have a high spell save DC, and you're confident they're not resistant to poison damage, then it's not half bad and does some pretty competitive damage. Although Toll the Dead is still better, it does the same damage, has a longer range, and deals necrotic damage, and targets Wisdom, which a lot of monsters have a low score in. And at number 6, we have Resistance. This is a 1-minute buff you can cast on someone, which allows them to add a d4 to a saving throw. This does require concentration and is actually not half bad at first glance, because basically giving someone a minor buff for a saving throw can only be a positive. It's just, unlike Guidance, which basically lets you do the same thing but for skill checks, you don't know when you're going to be doing saving throws most of the time. And you can't use Resistance on someone who's about to make a saving throw because they're getting attacked by a spell. It has to be cast on them beforehand, where you can use Guidance on someone before they're about to attempt a skill check to like jump over a pit or something. So even though you can't use Resistance reactively, there are still some situations in which you might want to use it, like if you're sending someone to go out to check for traps. For that minute, they'll have a buff that will give them a slightly higher chance of avoiding the trap if it requires a saving throw. Or if you know you have some time to prep before combat is about to start, giving Resistance to a squishy target could help them on a saving throw for getting hit by a spell or something, as long as you have no intentions of using your concentration for anything else though. The concentration requirement is kind of what kills what could be a lot more useful ability. There's a chance you could just drop it before the target even gets to perform a saving throw. So while it has situational uses, they're a little too far and in between to be considered a must-pick spell. And at number 5, we have Magic Stone. This is a damaging cantrip which allows you to enchant 1 to 3 stones in order to allow them to deal 1d6 damage plus your spellcasting modifier. And if you throw the stones, gives them a range of 60 feet, rather than the normal 20 feet of an improvised weapon attack. You can even use the magic stones with a sling if you have it, in which case it still does the same damage. So, what is bad about this ability? Well, at early levels, it's actually pretty good. Being able to throw stones at people isn't half bad. You only have to use it as a bonus action a single time in order to get 3 charges of it essentially, which will free up your spells on subsequent turns if you want to use them for something else. Even though you still do need to use your action in order to throw the stone, so it doesn't free up your actions, it just frees up having to use a spell in order to enchant those stones. You can also give the stones to other people and they'll still have your spell attack modifier on the roll, which could allow you to arm commoners with actual good attacks to use. And it's even one of the few cantrips that actually increases its damage based on your spellcasting modifier. However, here's the thing with it. It doesn't actually scale more than that. And even if you had a +5 to your spellcasting modifier, it would still do less damage than Toll the Dead or Poison Spray. And at early levels, you very rarely have a +5 to your damage modifier. So once you leave tier 1, it kind of stops becoming useful because it doesn't scale like a lot of other cantrips. And that's the only reason it's on this list. It's actually great in early levels, almost competitive with other ranged attack cantrips. But even then, it's still slightly worse than Firebolt, Chill Touch, or Eldritch Blast, while also having half the range of those abilities. And then as soon as you enter tier 2 and above, it almost becomes useless, outside of the use of being able to arm very weak creatures with magic stones to throw at people. And at number 4, we have Friends. This is a cantrip which allows you to have advantage on all of your charisma checks directed at one creature of your choice which isn't hostile to you, which can be incredibly useful when you're trying to sneak past a guard or talk your way out of a social situation that might go sour, which are situations that come up quite a bit in a lot of games of D&D. But there's one little downside to this ability, and when I say downside, I mean such a big downside that a lot of people don't ever use it because of it, where, after its 1 minute effect ends, the target you use it on will know you use magic on them and then immediately become hostile to you. So if you just try to talk your way out of a situation normally and fail, there is a chance they won't actually attack you or anything else, unless you have a really vindictive DM who punishes failed rolls. Although, if you use Friends, then you're guaranteed they'll attack you afterwards. In a lot of cases, it's just straight up worse than trying to perform your checks like normal. However, even with these really bad downsides, there are still some situations in which it's useful. Like if you're trying to quickly get past a guard who might have stopped you while you're on your way out of a fortress or something. This would allow you to talk your way out of it much easier, and then by the time the effect ends, you'll be long gone so there's no risk of retribution. Although, if you're trying to use it to get past a guard in order to get into a place, then you probably just alerted everyone there to your presence instead. So it's not completely useless, but I have yet to see anyone actually use this ability in a campaign in my 4 years of playing the game, despite many people taking the cantrip, just because they're too afraid to actually use it. And at number 3, we have Druidcraft. This is basically Prestidigitation for Druids, where Prestidigitation is a cantrip that allows you to perform basically one of any minor magical effect, and made it into my list of the top 10 best cantrips. There's also another similar ability called Thaumaturgy, which allows you to perform a minor magical effect, although ones involving sound and noise, which are pretty useful in a lot of situations. Druidcraft allows you to perform a minor magical effect that has to do with nature, although none of the effects are as good as Prestidigitation or Thaumaturgy. With Druidcraft, you can instantly make a single flower blossom, create a harmless sensory effect like a puff of wind, a few falling leaves, or the faint odor of a skunk. Just as long as those minor magical effects fit in a 5-foot cube. You can predict the weather for the next 24 hours, and you can just instantly snuff out a small source of fire, like a candle, torch, or campfire. The only one of these things that might be useful is simulating the sound of a small animal somewhere else to maybe create a distraction, and predicting the weather in a campaign where the DM actually rolls for negative weather effects. Otherwise, the effects are kind of laughably minor in comparison to some of the stuff you can get away with Prestidigitation or Thaumaturgy. It is definitely the weaker of the 3 minor magical effect cantrips, where Prestidigitation can actually do half the things Druidcraft is able to do, while also doing more useful things, like create small minor illusions or clean blood from your clothes after a battle. Druidcraft is just not as useful in comparison, and is definitely more of a flavor spell if you're in more RP-focused game and really want to fit in a nature-loving character. And at number 2, we have Blade Ward. This is a spell which grants you resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage dealt by weapon attacks until the end of your next turn. The ability does take your action to use and basically only lasts for 6 seconds. You can't really precast it before combat in order to have the resistance. Here's the thing with Blade Ward. Resistance to those damage types is good, sure, but mechanically speaking, it's not better than just taking the dodge action. The dodge action doesn't require you to know a cantrip, can be used by anyone, and gives advantage on all attack rolls for the turn. So if you want to take less damage for a turn, you're better off taking the dodge action. However, if you're able to take the dodge action as a bonus action or something, and really want to take extra less damage, then also using Blade Ward on your turn might be a situationally useful thing to do. There are some situations in which you might want to use Blade Ward over the dodge action though, like if you want to take damage but just a little bit of it, There's a spell in the game called Armor of Assessts, which gives you 5 temporary hit points per spell level you use to cast it, and while you have these temporary hit points, it will deal 5 cold damage to creatures that hit you, which also scales to the level of the spell. And as soon as the temporary hit points are gone, the spell ends. So, if you want to extend the duration and life of Armor of Assessts as long as possible, because you want to deal that reflect damage to as many targets as you can, then that's a situation in which Blade Ward is more useful than the dodge action, because you'll be able to take more hits and reduce the damage of those hits. Or if you're playing a caster that's able to attack as a bonus action due to a class feature or some other ability, you could use Blade Ward as your action and then whatever else you're going to use as your bonus action for that turn if you wanted to take less damage. So Blade Ward is most useful when it's not used as your action, and you're able to choose it as a bonus action or something, if you're able to do something else because you casted the spell, or if for some reason you just want to take damage but not a lot of it. These situations still don't make it very good though. Blade Ward is kind of meant to be situationally useful, and would be too useful if it was an actual reaction spell. So they kind of made it an action instead, which almost made it useless outside of those incredibly niche situations I mentioned earlier. And at number 1, we have True Strike. This is definitely the worst cantrip in the game, and it's almost like they created this cantrip as a joke because of how unuseful it is in most situations. What it does is it allows you to concentrate in order to target someone within 30 feet, which grants you the effect that on your next turn, you have advantage on your first attack roll against that target. This ability does take your action to cast and only comes into play on your next turn. So even if you're able to cheat the spell as a bonus action, you still have to wait a turn before using it. And here's the thing with True Strike. Statistically speaking, your chance to hit with an ability is the same if you just attack twice anyway. With True Strike, you have to set up the ability using one action, then use one action on your next turn in order to actually gain the effect, which just gives you advantage and allows you to roll twice for that attack roll. Or you could just attack twice, which also allows you to roll twice for the attack roll. You don't actually gain a statistical advantage for using True Strike. However, in situations in which it might be useful, say you have permanent disadvantage against a target for some reason, True Strike could negate that disadvantage, I guess. Say you have an ability that you absolutely want to land because it's a hard-hitting strike or spell or whatever that you can only use once a day. Then you can't really attack twice with it anyway, so True Strike would give you an advantage in trying to land it. But one of the other bad things about True Strike is that it requires your concentration. So the spell can end early before you actually gain the benefits of it, if you just get attacked a few times during your turn and you fail your concentration rolls. So it's just kind of a bad spell, which is overly balanced for an effect that's only situationally useful, and easily earns the number 1 spot on this list. Alright, and that's the list. Honestly, most of the cantrips in 5e are pretty good, and even half the ones that are on this list aren't actually bad and just kind of situationally useful. So if you think there's any worse cantrips than the ones in this video or that I might have missed, I'd love to hear about them down in the comments, as well as ideas for future videos just like this one.